Okay, so here we are. We are taking a look at the practice exam. I'll just make this a little bit larger, most of the screen here. And as you can see, I've indicated that the work that I've done on this practice exam, the example work we're going to look at today, took me about 53 minutes to complete. So essentially, this is a version of a final exam. It's a past final exam that I put up last week, actually at the end of the weekend for you guys to practice with. And I just went through it and did it as though I was a student. So I'm going to go through and take a look at my work. I'll show some examples in one section that I left uncompleted that I was going to demonstrate in class before we got canceled for snow. So let's take a look at everything together. So the very first thing you will do is always when you're starting this type of work, you want to read the assignment notes or the kind of instructional notes very carefully. So this one says, read the short story in the left-hand column and apply all of our reading and annotation skills to read it through a literary perspective. So you'll remember that one of the methods we've learned for annotation is a specific tool for analyzing literature, which is something that most students have to do when they take the English 115 or 125 class. On a deeper level than that, you could apply this to any paradigm of research. So these windows that I've created down here, the beta, alpha, and theta, which are the windows that we set up for analyzing literature, that's essentially just a paradigm to view a reading resource through. Which is what I'm asking you to do for the test tomorrow. So you can see here it carries on to say, thus you should find and analyze the beta, alpha, and theta windows. Now, if you don't remember what those are, you can go back onto VIU Learns and review the concepts or check through your notes, which you should have taken when we learned these windows. Essentially, beta is the most rudimentary story levels, things like characters, setting, conflict, climax, resolution. Alpha is looking at devices of comparison and more kind of poetic devices. So you've got metaphor, simile, personification, alliteration, things of that nature. And the theta window is kind of the more deep and holistic view of the story. So things like your theme, the tone. We've had some Latin terms like carpe diem, which means seize the day, and hubris, which is this idea that comes from Greek literature that often characters will set up their own downfall. So those are just some of the basic ones that were mentioned, and as you can see, just as a note to myself, when I'm going to analyze this, I've included the main things that I can recall and that I'm going to focus on. Now, when you're doing this type of analysis, you don't have to look at every single one of these literary devices. The more important thing is to show me that you can capture them when you're doing your reading, that you can properly do an annotation system to organize your notes so that another student who wanted to borrow your notes would understand them, or later, weeks later, you could come back and reread your notes and still take value from them. So you'll see here, if you're looking at the example story, which was called One Pine Hill, I've gone straight in. I've already set up the beta, which is characters, setting, and conflicts. I've got the alpha, which simile, metaphors, personification, alliteration. I've got all the things. I'm just going to add tone in here to the theta window. And then as I go down, you'll see that I've used a numbering system. B obviously stands for the beta window. I've given it color coding. So all of these are our annotation practices. And as we go through, you can see that each one of the notes is connected to a sidebar note or an annotation note. So the first paragraph starts with, atop the weather hill stood the remains of the last giant pine. It had been bucked down by the metal alligators and their growling teeth, wielded by the hungry-eyed ants who swarmed across the land in a famished host. So very short paragraph, just a few quick sentences, but there's a lot of literary value packed in there. You can see note number 1, I've indicated it's in the beta window. It's the setting. This is a hill. And then I've added a note, kind of a critical analysis note. Why is it called Weather Hill? I've asked myself. Then second, I've indicated note 2, giant pine. This is a character, and that it's the last pine of the mountain, or of this little hill that used to be a forest. So the number over here in the main body connects to my annotation note. The color and my little B lets me know that I'm working in the beta window. So you can see that everything's quite well organized. Note number 3 is talking about the conflict, and you can see that what I'm doing here as I make my annotation notes is I am using abbreviations where it makes sense. Conflict cut down equals destruction, so I'm capturing the core idea. Note number 4, by the metal alligators and their growling teeth, I'm actually saying that there are metal alligators walking through the forest with sharp metal teeth. No, it's a metaphor, right? So I'm comparing chainsaws to hungry alligators. It creates an image. It's a literary method. Number 5, the hungry-eyed ants. Do we really think there are big giant ants out there carrying alligators in their arms? No, obviously this is another comparison. So again, I've indicated it's a metaphor, and that humans here, I've made the jump, I've bridged this gap that who would be cutting down the forest. Obviously it's a comparison to humans. So the author is comparing humans to ants. This is a dehumanizing effect, which also tells us something about one of the main themes of this entire short story. And then so you can see at the end here, point 6, swarmed across the land in a famished host. So again, I've indicated note 6 that this is the theta device, and I've indicated it is thematic, and that I've highlighted a theme of consumption, or the poor use of our natural resources is killing the planet. This is a major idea that flows through the entire story. So then as you go on, you'll see that the notes and the color coding continue, and there's a fairly strong balance that I'm kind of trying to capture all of the windows equally. That's a good strategy. Instead of leaning heavily on one window like the beta, I want to see that you're including all 3 windows. It shows me that you can read intelligently and that you understand what the different windows are, and also that you're taking the time to do a deep reading here, which is one of the most important things about our annotation process. This is just a reminder that annotation is a deep reading where you're reading with a purpose. So in this case, we're reading with the purpose of doing literary analysis. Then you can see that as we go on, all of this is kind of collected. Now here's an interesting one to note, is that if you have 2 devices in the same sentence or within the same type of idea, that you can combine them. So B plus T would mean beta window plus a theta device. So I've got setting and conflict, plus I've also indicated that there's some irony woven into this image. And you can see what the notes are talking about. So also don't forget, I've included this document on VIU Learn, so you can go through and check all of my notes. Okay, so here's this new section that I wanted to do together. So we'll just go through here and see where we are in the story. The forest had once been expansive, lush, and varied. So there's been a shift of perspective. It's gone back in time with a singing canopy of boughs that housed a host of birds who called and sang like a symphony of joy. The sun had shone down smiling, and his bright arrows of light had been joyously devoured by the green arms of the trees. His light bolts twinned with the waters pure to be converted into sugars, fibers, roots, and life. And then the swarming maggots had come with their greedy-eyed metal monsters, and they had cut down the forests mercilessly, like death with her razor-edged scythe. So we've got similes, we've got metaphors, and those are all indicated in my notes over here in the annotation bar. Carrying on, we move on. It brings in the character of the sun and how the sun is looking down on the destruction, not so happy about it. And let's take a look at this next section. He shook his golden head and wept a single tear that evaporated like a desert raindrop. So I've indicated that I'm going to make a note on this. So I put my numbers in there, and then I just need to do the work in the annotation bar. So 18, and here we have a alpha device, and it is a simile. We could make it shorter, we could just call it a sim. The tear of the sun god is indirect compared to desert rain. Good. Then we go on. But the south wind came blowing. She had loved to visit the pine forest, to dance and play in the sighing boughs of her friends, the trees. So again, we have, this one's interesting because this is what I would call a braided device. We have a beta, the new character being introduced, but we also have a alpha in personification because the wind is being given human qualities. So we could say character plus personif, which is a short version of personification. A new character enters the story, the wind. This is also personif. Wind is made human. And so what we could do here is we could grab the front bit, highlight it as yellow because it is a beta device, and then we could grab this character and we could highlight that as yellow as well. And then we could do the same down here. So you can see that you can be a little bit creative and clever about how you're using your highlighting to indicate the type of analysis that you're doing, and that you take your time with this portion. And so this is what we also, this type of joined device, this is when two windows are together, we call it a braided device. So you can also include that type of analysis when you look at the new story, which is going to be on the final exam, which I'll be posting tomorrow. And then you would go onwards and you continue with this. So here we'll just, south wind came blowing. So I'll just indicate, boom, this is the new character, and then go down here and indicate that this is the personification. And so then you would go on and you continue reading. Now I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I know that the YouTube videos can't go over 12 minutes, and I've come to 11 minutes. So this is just an example of how you would read and analyze. Now I will stop there. I'll make a second video that will take a look at the next portion of the exam, which is the triangulation question.